Hey, thanks for downloading the Garden Fork Radio Podcast. Appreciate you taking the time to check us out. If you're new to the show, Garden Fork is the eclectic DIY show. I have a audio podcast, I have a YouTube channel with videos, and I have a gardenfork.tv website as well. And Garden Fork Radio here is just kind of a place for me and my friends to talk about kind of whatever pops into our head. Today we have my friend Kenny Point, who I met last year at the Troy Built get-together. We're both part of their Saturday 6 blogging program. We've had a couple other people on the show from that program, Rochelle and Aaron, all neat people. And Kenny kind of brings what I consider to be a different view that kind of turns convention on its head with a lot of the plants that he grows in Pennsylvania. And I really like that because when I ran it, we'll talk about it when he's on the show here, but he gave me some ginger, and I didn't realize you could grow ginger in New England or Pennsylvania, and that kind of spurred a really nice conversation we had. So Kenny left his job in Washington, D.C., working for the federal government to go work on an organic garden. And I think his story will be interesting if any of you are thinking about that. He talks a little bit about what that was like. So here we are with Kenny, and then I'll catch you afterward. So, hey, Kenny, thanks for taking the time to be on the show.
Sure. Thanks for inviting me on your show.
So, everyone, Kenny and I met in Charleston last year at the Troy Built get-together, where we both got to try out their equipment and learn more about them. And Troy Built renewed our sponsorship for another year, so that's cool. So Kenny and I are going to actually see each other next week in Austin, so I'm looking forward to that. But Kenny, I was doing a little research on you, and I really kind of like your story here, where you started out working in Washington, D.C., and it sounds like you had an epiphany to get out and get your hands into a garden. Is that right?
I did. I grew up in the D.C. area, and that's where I had lived from the time I was born until I graduated from college. And that was the point when, I had an interest prior to that, like from when I was a kid, as far as gardening. I enjoyed gardening, and, it was something that I always thought, well, one day, I'll maybe have a chance to move out of the area and move somewhere more of a rural type setting and have more land where I can grow more things. And I just got to the point where I started thinking, well, why should I just think about that for the future? Maybe there's some opportunities for me to do it now. And it wound up that I met a woman that was speaking in the area in D.C., and she did a lot of foraging, and she was talking about wild plants and edible plants and medicinal plants. And I met her, and afterwards I contacted her and just threw out there, asked her if she knew of any organic farmers that were looking for help. And it turns out that they were on her farm. So I went up and visited her, and, to make this story short, a couple of weeks after I went up and met them, I was there living on their farm, and I was there for probably about 5 years. And I went from more or less an apprentice to, by the time I was, before I left there, I was pretty much managing all of the gardens, and they also had a natural food store, and they had orchards, and I was managing all of the operations of their farm.
Wow. So you've done what almost everyone listening here wants to do.
Yeah. Yep. And it was something like some of my friends and family thought I was making mistakes because I had a great job, and I just left all that and was going somewhere where I was basically volunteering. But it turned out to be the best thing I ever could have done, and I really never lost anything, and my career was still there, and, everything was just worked out for the best.
Could you, for people that are listening, could you offer some suggestions that people are thinking about making this giant life change? I mean, what did you find when you started to work on the farm? What did you think would happen, and then what really happened after you got there? Were there any kind of big adjustments or surprises that you weren't expecting?
Not really, because I was kind of open, and I didn't have a whole lot of expectations, and I was really in a position where I could make that move. It wasn't like I had debts or anything that I had to be concerned with, paying bills or anything like that. So it was a pretty smooth transition for me. And one thing I think now, it's a lot easier, because when I did that, it wasn't the same type of opportunities. Like now, it would be so easy for people that are interested in doing something like that to doing an internship or an apprenticeship on an organic farm, or there are groups and organizations where you can connect with them and get all types of leads, and people that are just promoting for people that want to get into farming and to do it in a sustainable or organic manner. It's just easier to get started because there's just a ton of opportunities in pretty much every area where you could look. There's all kinds of things like CSAs, which didn't exist back when I was starting, but now they're all over the place, and it's just so much opportunity.
So now you've left that farm and you're living at your own house in Pennsylvania, and you're back to being a backyard gardener. Is that right?
Yes, I am. And, it's something I do. I work full time. So on the side, I do the gardening and I do the blogging with my website. So it's something I've kept my hand involved with. And I also enjoy doing a lot of things like going to different sustainable food conferences. Like here in Pennsylvania, there's a PASA, Pennsylvania Association for Sustainable Agriculture. And they just had their winter conference a couple of weeks ago. That's always a great event. And I do a lot of things like that, traveling. I go and do different workshops on things like cultivating mushrooms and fermentation and just lots of things like that.
Yeah, I was really kind of blown away. When we met last year, you handed me this brown paper bag, and I'm like, what's in this thing? And and I open it up, and it's like a finger of ginger. And you're like, You can grow this. I'm like, I live in New England. He goes, you can grow this.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got to talking, and I found out that you grow ginger and some other things that I wouldn't expect in Pennsylvania, which is a very similar climate to where I am. So how did you come upon that?
Well, that's something that I enjoy, like stretching the seasons and growing things that people think you can't grow, or just things that will provide a challenge. That's something that I've always enjoyed doing. So, if I think there's a possibility, I'll try things like the ginger and turmeric, and a lot of the things, they aren't as difficult to grow in this area, even if you're in a northern climate. Ginger, it will grow perfectly fine. You don't necessarily wind up with the brown skin ginger that you see in the store. It's more of they call it baby ginger. It has a white color with pink tips, and it doesn't mature to the point where you have that tough outer skin. But in some ways, that's a benefit, because the ginger, you don't have to peel it. You can just slice it, and you can eat the whole entire thing. You can pickle it. And it's the same with other things like the turmeric. It'll grow just fine here. Some of them you have to pre-sprout them, start them earlier indoors, and then move them outdoors when it warms up enough after your frost-free period. But there are a lot of things that you can grow that people just don't even think about or don't try. I have things here like hardy kiwis. I have kiwi vines where I can harvest kiwis every summer, and
wow.
I've grown pomegranate trees and things like Jamaican sorrel, things that are considered, somewhat tropical, but they will grow here.
I'm wondering, could you keep the ginger in the ground, or do you have to pull it out because of the freeze?
Yeah, you would have to pull it out. It wouldn't survive the freeze, and it wouldn't be like a perennial. But what I do is I'll grow most of it. I plant in the garden, so it's in the ground. But some I will also put in containers. And what I grow in containers, I can move some of those indoors during the winter. And even if you bring ginger inside, usually it still goes dormant. It'll die back. The leaves and everything will die. There's nothing there except the tuber, the rhizome, is still under the soil, and that'll grow again in the springtime.
So would I keep the soil moist in the winter, or do I let it go dry when it's in the pot in your house?
You can let it grow dry. You don't want it to be bone dry. Like, if you can water it, maybe not like as much as you would a plant that was not dormant, but you don't want it to be real moist, and you don't want it to be completely dry either. So
kind of like you're trying to get your rosemary plant through the winter.
See, for me, rosemary plants are tougher because I had problems with those, and I think it's just the conditions inside the house. Certain things struggle. And then on the other hand, there are some things that do fine in the winter for me, like my bay laurel. I bring that tree indoors during the winter, and that does fine. I also fig trees. I don't bring them in the house, but I move those in because I grow those in containers also, and I'll
Yep.
move them into the garage during the winter. And they do fine in the garage.
We have my neighbor has a beautiful fig tree, and the squirrels raid the thing all the time. It drives me crazy.
Really? Okay. Yes, these squirrels don't really bother with my fig trees.
That's
I had
wild.
more problems with them digging in containers than going after the actual fruit.
You mentioned turmeric, and turmeric lately has been in the news as a medicinal plant. Is it? Are you growing it for the tuber, or does it have a seed? Or
It's the tuber is the part that you're using as a food typically. But the other cool thing about turmeric is that the leaves are edible. And in some cultures, they're used more for culinary purposes. And even ginger, those leaves are edible too. You can eat them and you can cook with them.
oh, you can buy different leaves. There's a Indian Pakistani grocery store in my neighborhood, and they sell different leaves, like curry leaves. They have there, which is very
Okay.
interesting.
Hmm.
Cool. So if people were going to grow turmeric, was it similar to the treatment that you do for ginger, that you bring it in the winter? Or?
It is, and it's also similar in that you want to start it early. In like, I have my ginger and turmeric seeds should be arriving tomorrow, so I'll take that and I will, as soon as I get it, I'll put it in shallow flats with some soil, and I'll pre-sprout it to get it growing, and you want to get it an early start with that. But the funny thing about it too is that ginger and turmeric out in the garden is pretty hardy because I'll leave it out there to grow through the spring into the summer and into the fall. And I usually don't harvest mine until like maybe September, sometimes even into October it'll be before I really dig that up to use it.
Wow, that's great. So something I saw recently that you were talking about is that you're growing your own mushrooms, and that is on my to-do list for this year. So
Hmm.
how
Okay.
do I do that?
There's a number of different ways. There are things you can do, like you can grow mushrooms, and if you have access to wood chips, there are varieties that grow perfectly fine in wood chips. One is called King Strophoria, or it's also referred to as a wine cap, and that's the one that you get to spawn, and you can spread it in piles of wood chips, and it'll grow. It'll produce mushrooms. It'll go spread throughout the pile of wood chips, and then eventually it'll start fruiting. And right now, I started growing those in my garden in the landscape, and now that they pop up all over the place, even places where I didn't inoculate the wood chips, I still have them coming up in different parts of the garden.
And they're
And
an
then
edible
another,
mushroom?
oh yes, they are. Yep. And they're really good. There's something you would never find them at a store though. That's something if you wanted to try them, you would pretty much have to grow them yourself.
Because my
Another.
town has a giant pile of wood chips at the town garage, and you can
Hmm.
go get them for free. So do the wood chips have to be aged, or are fresh wood chips okay?
Fresh. You want fresh. You don't want them. I mean, they don't have to be extremely fresh, but you don't want aged wood chips. You want them to be somewhat, freshly cut.
Oh, that is
And
cool.
another option is to use logs. You can inoculate logs with things like shiitake, mushrooms, or oysters. And that's another cool thing is that there's different varieties. Some, are more culinary, others are more medicinal. But logs is another way. Would just drill holes in the logs, and then you would either use plugs or you could put spawn directly into the holes that you drill. Then you plug those with a little wax, and you just let them sit. And it might take, if you inoculate your logs in the spring, you might possibly get some mushrooms by the fall, but more than likely it might not be until the following spring and onward that the logs will start producing mushrooms. But once they do, they'll continue to fruit and produce mushrooms for years. I've had logs that lasted at least 5 years, and they were still producing mushrooms from that one time that you actually have to do the work of inoculating them. And then after that, all you have to do is harvest.
Cool, because I have behind my house, there's a bunch of hardwoods that drop, and in various stages of decomposition. But I've noticed that the oyster mushrooms, which are plentiful in my town, they'll grow along those dead logs for a couple. I can keep going to the same place for a couple of years, and harvesting the mushrooms.
Okay. Yep. Cool. Now,
So,
one thing, if you're cultivating logs that you want to use, you do have to use logs that are freshly cut, because that's just like you're saying, the mushrooms, the logs that are in your wood lot, you see oysters growing on them. So you couldn't take those logs and inoculate them, because they've already been inoculated, or they've already been
colonized.
infiltrated by right. So that's the reason why you want to use somewhat freshly cut logs when you're purposely introducing your own strains of mushrooms.
Sweet. And you mentioned you were kind of taking this a step further and moving into the world of science and chemistry, or?
Yeah, I'm doing more indoor cultures, and I'm getting, specific scientific equipment, things like flow hoods, where I can work under sterile conditions and grow cultures out, and, use different techniques. Even like, you may have seen the little kits that you can get at the market, where it's just like a bag, and you take that home, and it'll fruit mushrooms.
Yep.
To the point where I can do things like make those kits if I wanted to. I can go from taking the spawn and inoculating the bags of not wood chips, but
Looks like sawdust.
The sawdust, exactly. You can use that, or you can use grains. There are different things that you can use to inoculate or to make kits. And then, rather than buy spawn to use to inoculate my logs, I can grow my own spawn. So that's also an advantage, and it saves money, and it's easy to do yourself rather than having to purchase spawn. But that's something that, if you're just starting, you definitely just want to go and purchase spawn and go that route.
All right. Yeah, I'm going to go the easy route.
Yeah.
So along those lines, I know you were doing some fermentation, and I've made some sauerkraut and some beer, but just talking to you, I imagine that you've taken it to another level.
Just at this point, I've still been doing mainly vegetables. Like I'll do sauerkraut. I've fermented things like green beans, and I like garlic. Some beverages like the water kefir I've done. But now I want to do more things, like there's a whole world of fermenting things like grains that I have not explored at all. But that's one of the next things I want to do. And even possibly beans, like people that are doing the tempeh and tofus and things like that. I'd like to get more familiar with those processes as well.
Is the barley that they use in beer, is that partially fermented? Because I know it's partially sprouted, but is that considered a fermented grain? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I consider pretty much all beer goes through a fermentation process, just like, wines, that's another fermented process. But then there are fermented beverages that you can make that aren't alcoholic as well, that don't have the alcohol.
Yeah, I've had, I get my kombucha from the Whole Foods,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But a buddy of mine took some of the kombucha from a Whole Foods, and he was able to culture his own, is it called a SCOBY, the little floating gelatin thing?
Right, yes.
And that seems to be the key, is if you start your SCOBY, it's kind of like a sourdough bread starter. You can divide it and share it amongst your friends and that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Because they grow and they multiply, and you have to, you can't, if you don't thin them out, that can be a problem. So I know people that are doing that, and they have more of a problem, because they have to find someone to share their SCOBYs with. So that's something I have not done that. I've done, more of the water kefirs at this point.
I've heard about that, but I haven't had that yet. So, well, the one last thing I wanted to touch on is that we're both beekeepers. But you do two different kinds of beekeeping. You use what are called Langstroth hives, which are the typical squarish rectangular boxes that stack on top of each other. So,
right.
But you also do top bar hives, and I don't do that. And I was kind of curious what your experience has been with that, because a lot of people see top bar hives as a more affordable thing because they can build the equipment themselves.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah, and I'd say it can be more affordable, especially if you're building your own hives, then you're going to save money right there. But the other thing, I just enjoy the top bar because it's like interesting, and there's certain advantages, at least for me. And it seems like the bees in my top bar hives, the colonies grow and expand a lot quicker than they do in my Langstroth hives.
Huh.
And was one of the other things that I really like about the top bar hives is it just seems like I've learned quite a bit, because you can go in and you can look and see what's going on inside the hive, and it doesn't disrupt them as much as if you were like pulling boxes apart and trying to go through and find where the brood nest is or where the queen is. It just doesn't seem like it's quite as disruptive, because you can pull out a single frame at a time, and while that one bar is out, you're not disrupting the rest of the bars, the rest of the bees in there. And the other like really huge advantage for me with the top bar hive is mine have a window on the back. So at any time I can go out there and I can open the window and I can see what's going on, and I'm not disrupting the bees at all. At that point, they really don't even know that I'm there, because I'm not opening up the hive. I'm just, opening the door to where I can look through the glass window that's on the back.
It's like an observation hive.
It is, except it's still a full-size operational hive. But I've opened up the window and seen, the queen there laying eggs. And even during the winter, I can always tell exactly where the cluster is, and I can see how it's moving during the winter. I can see exactly where they are. I can see if I'm feeding them. I can see if they're has food or if they're out of food. So that's another, just for me, one of the advantages of the top bar hive. But I like them both. I like the lines and the top bar hive. It's not like I would necessarily do one or say one is better than the other. They're just different.
Wow. Now you got me thinking, because when I do take apart the hives, it can be kind of chaotic. And also after my back injury, I'm just a lot more careful about stuff I'm doing. So.
Right. And that's another thing that a lot of people like, is like, you don't have to lift heavy boxes and manipulate them and move them around. You're typically working with one single bar at a time, and that's a lot easier as far as lifting.
Oh, sweet. Well, cool, man. Yeah. Kenny, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out. I know I've been
sure.
I've been kind of bugging you, and I know it's the end of the day for you, but for more information, you can find Kenny at Veggie Gardening Tips, and I'll link to that in the show notes here. And then maybe we can make a quick video when we meet in Austin. I think that'd be kind of fun.
Okay. Yeah, that would be cool. I'm looking forward to getting together with everybody again.
All right. Thanks for taking the time, sir.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. There you go. I'm wondering if you're at your destination by now. Most people listen to Garden Fork Radio in the car, it seems, or when they're on a walk or exercising. Always curious to hear from you guys. The email address is radio@gardenfork.tv. That's radio@gardenfork.tv. I recently got some really cool emails and actually a couple of cards as well to our post office box, and I will read them next time on the show. All right? So make it a great day, and I'll see you later. Bye. Garden Fork's theme music is used under license from uniquetracks.com.